Hello, everyone. I'm very, very happy to be joined by Thomas Back today, who's been a friend of mine for a few years now. He's with the University of Edinburgh and is interested in all things neuroscience and language related. So always a pleasure to speak to you, Thomas. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure as always. And I know that you, like me, we've got languages really at the heart of what we love. Our passion is for languages and language learning. And you've spoken at a number of events and shared a lot of your research and your knowledge about languages and language learning for many audiences around the world. So it's a pleasure to be able to talk to you, especially at this time where we're celebrating the languages of Europe on this day, right? So tell me, people often ask, what is it about language learning? What's the benefit of learning a language? Have you got any views on that at all?
Yeah, well, I would say my views are kind of changing as we go and as I reflect on the things and as I see what's going on around me. And in a way, to be honest with you, I think a lot of arguments that are being used to motivate people to learn languages are not necessarily working very well. I mean, one argument that is always made, and of course is a correct one, is, well, but because you are able to communicate with people, you can travel, you can then speak to people in their own language and so on, and that reaches then much closer than when you just use English or in other lingua franca. And the second type of arguments that are being used very often are business arguments. It's good for your business. In fact, the British Chamber of Commerce is very, very keen to promote language learning because they estimate that millions are getting lost every year to UK economy because there is such a shortage. Languages could open new business opportunities, could make you better in business, you can earn more, and so on and so on. And those arguments are all very correct, so that is true. But I think they are very much seeing language learning as a goal to achieve something. So you learn languages to get somewhere and then you can communicate, or then you can use it in business. Whereas the way I say language learning, I think of language learning, it's much more as a journey. So this is, so to say, to take the metaphor of a journey. It's the difference between getting from A to B as fast and easy as possible, or getting from A to B so that it's a real adventure. And then, in fact, getting to B might not even be as important as having a great time on a journey. And if we see language learning like this, it shifts a little bit the focus from just achieving the goal to the pleasures and the benefits of traveling. So let me just give a memory, in fact, which is kind of language related, because it was when I was still working on a big project between universities of Cambridge, Nottingham, Belfast, and Edinburgh, where I am, on multilingualism, empowering individuals and transforming societies. And we had meetings in all these universities. So one of them was in Belfast. And I remember, so we had to get to Belfast, and practically everybody apart from me took the plane. And there were a lot of delays. There were problems at the airport. Everybody arrived in the evening in Belfast absolutely exhausted. Now, I took a different route. I took a bus to Glasgow and then to Alloway. So I've seen on the way the cottage in which the poet Robert Burns was born. Then I took the ferry from Scotland to Belfast, and I arrived in the evening. Okay, I must have left a bit earlier, but I arrived like after having a wonderful journey in which I learned something, I see things. It was almost like having a mini holiday. So although my journey was longer than that of others, it was much more pleasurable, and it left me in the evening with much more energy and optimism and fascination. And that's how I see language learning. So I think it's not just of getting from A to B. And the first thing is, learning languages for me is very much like a journey. It's a journey of discovery. You discover new things. You discover connection between languages. You discover differences. And both are fascinating. It's fascinating to see that in a different language, you can use very similar way to express something, but it's equally fascinating to see how different something can be seen. Now, so that is a kind of a pleasure you will not get if you just want to get things easily. The second is one of the pleasures of traveling, as I'm sure you will experience as well, is that you meet exciting travel companions on the way. And learning languages, even if we do it from books or from online courses, we both know how lively the polyglot community is online. You learn people, you meet people, maybe first digitally, maybe then at a conference, and so on and so on. So you have these travel companions with whom you can share your adventures. And the third thing is the kind of cognitive benefits, about which, of course, I work a lot in my kind of professional life, the idea that language learning can be a good mental gymnastics for the brain. And here again, the important thing is not reaching a certain level. The important thing is the effort. The important thing is that we are doing this activity. And that is a very, very important shift in perspective. Because from the first perspective, from the perspective of learning languages as reaching a goal, there is a certain problem here, because on the other hand, you want to reach perfection. And firstly, it will never be easy, so you are bound to be disappointed. Even if you buy a book, Arabic made easy, you will probably still have tough time doing it, or in fact with any language. But on the second thing, you might also find that you never reach really the goal of speaking like the native, speaking like the people who grew up speaking that language. So in a way, it is a general problem which I think arises from, on the one hand, promising an easy path, and on the other, promising reaching a goal that is unrealistic. If you travel, you are more realistic. You know that traveling can be exhausting. You might need to wait, you might miss your connections, you might be in a traffic jam, you might, the weather might be bad, and the place you wanted to visit is closed, and so on and so on. But you take it because it's part of the adventure. Adventure is not necessarily easy, but it should be exciting. So if we move it away, the emphasis from things being easy to things being exciting, you are less likely to get disappointed and more likely to enjoy it. But by having difficulty and overcoming them, that is also what makes, in fact, the mental activity. I mean, in a way, if we want to be, of course, we can now drive from one place to the other, but if we walk, it might be better for our health. So again, we might use all the translation software and so on to make our life easy, but it is not necessarily a good exercise for our brain. So I think this shifting from goal to process makes it much more realistic, much more enjoyable, and in a way more powerful. And maybe the last thing I wanted to say is that it also makes it much more as a kind of permanent journey, because if you go somewhere, if you go regularly to different places, those places are changing. You will notice that if you travel, when I go now to Poland, which is my native country, of course, it's a completely different country than when I left, many decades ago. And the same is true for Germany and Switzerland, other countries in which I have lived. So the same with languages, because languages evolve, they change. So in a way, this metaphor of process means that it's a never-ending process, but it's good. It means it's always exciting. It always keeps some. That's why I think probably the topic of language learning should be approached not so far necessarily from a kind of easy reaching of unrealistic goals, but rather from the benefits of traveling.
I really like that metaphor. Thank you so much. I agree. Even if you travel the same road many times at different times of year, you'll observe different things. And you're very, very right. So it is with languages. You see different things on different journeys.
Absolutely. I mean, I find, for instance, a nice example when I, just in the last year BC, so before COVID, one of my last journeys was to Germany, which is a country in which, I lived for 17 years. I studied there, I worked there. And I remember that I was seeing at the airport, something about nurses. And the term used in German was Krankenpflegerin. Now, in the time I was in Germany and I was working in hospitals, so I used the term very often, it was Krankenschwester, so the sister of the ill, of the sick. Whereas now it has been replaced by the carer for the sick, which of course is connected with the idea that the kind of religious associations that the word sister had, and the association of, being devoted but not necessarily a professional, and so on and so on. So in a way, languages are always, and of course if I went to go to Poland, I learned a lot of new words as well, because language has moved on. So I would really shift the emphasis on excitement. And the problem with this kind of goal-reaching attitude is it's very static. You reach a goal, and then once you have it, you can only lose. Whereas the metaphor of the kind of, eternal pilgrimage means that you never reach the goal, but it's not a problem. It's in fact something good, because, reaching the goal would be death.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's nice what you said as well. It's not about perfection. And even if it's your own language, and even if you're a monolingual and you're learning as language, even in your first language as a monolingual, you will learn new words. So starting on a journey with a new language is the start of a journey. And so it's always worth taking those first steps out. When you first breathe in the air, when you first notice the leaves on the trees, when you first see a building you've never seen before. And those kinds of things are the very first steps. But that journey just goes on and on and on. And like you say, you will never ever tire of what you learn from the journey.
Absolutely. And in one way, I would even say that language learning has at least one advantage of the real traveling. And that is that you can also travel to places that don't exist anymore. I am really thrilled that Teach Yourself has now this new series of bringing alive ancient languages, Babylonian, Old Egyptian, Old Greek, so classical Old Greek, as well as New Testament Greek, Norse, and so on. All these languages are not spoken anymore, so we cannot travel to ancient Egypt, we cannot travel to ancient Greece or Babylon or to Viking Norse countries, but we can travel there by learning the languages. So in a way, I would say it's even, it has even one extra dimension that physical traveling cannot provide. And that's why I would say there's no such thing as a dead language, because you are traveling into a world where people lived, where people acted, people thought, people loved and hated, and all this is connected to languages.
Yeah, just you saying that now reminds me of the event in Edinburgh that we were both at, celebrating the languages of the Isles, the United Kingdom and Ireland. And at that event, we heard Mark Atherton, who obviously is the author of Old English, Teach Yourself book, and he sang a song in Old English in front of us all. And it was like breathing life back into something that you would never normally get to experience. I mean, something from centuries and centuries ago. And it's quite remarkable.
Exactly. I mean, I remember this event very well. I remember him thinking, in fact, I remember that, one of the first things I did thereafter was to buy a copy of this book, which I think is absolutely wonderful. So I think the whole series is fantastic because in a way, it shows also, I mean, you could say, I mean, what's really the point, of learning old languages? I mean, one, as I say, is you can extend your traveling, which is absolutely fascinating. But the second is, of course, you are going to the roots of languages, which can make you understand current languages much better. Yeah. So let me give you a kind of very strange example connecting English, Polish, and German. Mm-hmm. Now, in English, the term while, you write with WH, but it's pronounced not in Scots. In Scots, still has the distinction between WH and W, but of course in standard English pronounced as while. And why is this H there? Well, in German it's also called Weile, eine Weile. But the Polish word for that is chwila. So that means that the Polish word was borrowed from Germanic in a time where it was still pronounced as chwil. Then the H got lost in the Germanic languages, with some remnant in Scots, but it was preserved in Polish. So in fact, by speaking Polish, chwila, we are in some way putting new life into a Germanic form from possibly 1,500 years ago. And I think that is the fascination with old languages, because then, as I say, you start making connections. You start realizing that languages are not just some kind of individual unrelated things, that they develop with time. And in some way, paradoxically, I would say, learning about history make us more open for future. Because if there is always this idea of normativity, that's how things are said, that's correct, that's incorrect, and so on. But if you see a language as development, you realize this development will not magically finish just today because we happen to live today. It is still going on. So I would say learning about the past makes us more adaptable and open-minded to future developments.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, I guess it takes the metaphor to an entirely new level as well, because the journey that you were describing about, the self-discovery of learning a new language, whether it's a modern day language or an ancient language, actually what you're doing too is you're retracing the steps of other people who have come before you to
Yes,
a large degree.
Absolutely.
And you're
absolutely. So as I say,
way.
so it's in a way, it is a journey in space, but also in time.
That's beautiful. Thank you so, so much for joining me and for this conversation. It was an absolute pleasure, as always, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you very much again for the invitation.
Bye-bye.